Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video we have my Game Week 31 deadline decisions. This is a weekly series where I take you through your final questions and dilemmas ahead of the upcoming deadline. And for those of you asking, there is also a wildcard draft in this video as well. If you do enjoy today's video, please do smash that like button, and if you're new around here, make sure to subscribe as well. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So guys, considering the fixtures this week for both Liverpool having Sheffield United at home and Arsenal having Luton at home, I think the priority transfer for many people will be a Liverpool asset, an Arsenal asset, or potentially both. And I think a lot of people this week will be taking hits. Now, I'd love to know down below, are you planning on taking a hit yourself? And I think those that aren't taking a hit have either just wildcarded or are potentially looking to wildcard themselves. So I think there will be wildcards flying, there'll be hits flying. And in these first two sections, I wanted to take a look at the key Liverpool assets that are worth considering and maybe give them a bit of a ranking, and then look at the key Arsenal assets that are worth considering as well. For Liverpool, I've actually only got 7 assets here, and I think some of these aren't even real considerations for me. With Arsenal, I've got 10, and you could have even potentially listed more. So I think with the Liverpool assets, it's a little bit easier to decide who are the key ones to bring in, whereas Arsenal, I think there is a little bit more of a spread. So for Liverpool, the reason you would like to bring them in is obviously they play against Sheffield United at home this week. They've also got 2 decent fixtures coming up too, and then they double in 34. I will just note that beyond Game Week 34, I don't necessarily think you'll want to have any Liverpool assets. That being said, they will still be in a title fight at that point. We can almost guarantee it will go until at least Game Week 37, unless there are some real surprises. 2 of the teams drop lots of points, but I think they'll be in a title race, and therefore, whilst their fixtures aren't perfect beyond 34, you could conceivably hold 1, 2, or even 3 for the remainder of the season, and they may well serve you quite well. However, I do think the best spell to have a Liverpool asset is from now until double Game Week 34. I think if you are looking to save your free hit for later on in the season, or you've already used it, i.e. you are not using your free hit in 34, Liverpool assets are even better given they have one of the best doubles in Game Week 34. So with all of that being said, who should we potentially be considering? In defence, I've currently got 2 players listed here, which is Bradley and Van Dijk. You could go for a Quanta if you think he'll continue to play, but Konate could take minutes off him. Gomez could play at left back. Speaking of Gomez, maybe you look at him because he's been getting good minutes, but Tsimikas and Robertson, when he's fit, can play at left back. And then Gomez, I know, could go out to right back, but Bradley's been playing very well. So largely, I think the only player that is absolutely nailed on at the moment is Virgil van Dijk. Even Bradley himself, in the absence of Trent, I don't think is fully nailed. And of course, Trent will be back relatively soon. Looks like it will be earliest probably the Crystal Palace game with respect to Premier League games, but it could potentially be around then. And even if it's not then, we then have double Game Week 34. So Bradley is probably not going to serve you unless Trent picks up another injury or he re-aggravates his injury. Bradley's probably not going to serve you long term, and you probably won't get him for the double game week. So really it is Van Dijk. So to keep it simple without even looking at the data, if you need a nailed Liverpool defender, Van Dijk is the only one for me. On Bradley, though, it may well be worth the risk, given a couple of things. Firstly, we don't know that Trent will definitely be back. It keeps being pushed back and back and back. And it may just be that he's re-aggravating it. It may be that they are maybe being slightly over-optimistic. And therefore, if he's not back for the Palace game, which looks like to be the aim now, or the Atalanta game, but maybe not the Palace game, then maybe you do get double game week 34 out of Bradley. But the other thing is, I think the upside is so high in the next few weeks, especially against Sheffield United at home if he starts, that maybe it doesn't even matter. Maybe you just take a short-term punt a few weeks, and especially if you're looking to free hit in 34 anyway, I think Bradley is ideal. He's so much cheaper than Van Dijk, and his attacking data is very strong. Across the season, we're looking at about a 0.31 non-penalty expected goals per 90. In the last 6, we're looking at 0.23. So I personally think if you're free hitting in 34, I would go for Bradley now ahead of Van Dijk. I think it's worth the risk. If you're not free hitting in 34 and you have the money for Van Dijk, I would probably go for Van Dijk ahead of Bradley just for the security of minutes. But I will just note, if you look at Virgil van Dijk's data this season, it's been pretty poor. Much worse than what we've seen in previous seasons, because Van Dijk is a real goal threat usually, but you can see here his data is 0.11 across the season and it's 0.09 across the last 90. As you'll see when we move on to the Arsenal assets, that's sort of similar to the likes of Saliba, and we've been saying that Saliba doesn't carry any real attacking threat. So Van Dijk for me is probably overpriced when you consider the lack of attacking threat, but given the fixtures, given the double, And given his historical data, I still do really like Van Dijk as an option. Moving on to the attackers, I will discuss Diaz, Darwin and Salah together because they are going to be the three most popular attackers, and obviously they have the best data too, and rightly so. But just a quick discussion around McAllister and Szoboszlai if you're looking to go different. I don't really think Szoboszlai is worth it considering how expensive he is. Luis Diaz is only 0.4 more, and as we'll discuss in a second, I really like Luis Diaz, and therefore I just don't see the value in going for Szoboszlai. He does take a few set pieces. Yes, he's got a fantastic long shot, but as you can see across the season, we're looking at about a 0.33 expected goal involvement per 90 non-penalty, which basically means across a 3-game spell, you're expecting one attacking return from him, and he could definitely do more than that with the easier fixtures coming up, but I just still don't see the value in going for Szoboszlai if you can get up to someone like a Luis Diaz. And if you can't stretch to a Luis Diaz, I still feel like McAllister is probably the midfielder I'd go for. Across the season, his data is very, very poor. 0.23 non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90 is worse than Bradley. It's really not very good. However, in recent weeks, that's gone up to 0.52. And I would love to know down below, Liverpool fans, if you're watching this and you support Liverpool, has something changed recently with McAllister? Because I've watched most of Liverpool's recent games, and I don't understand how his data was ever 0.23. I think it was because he was playing a deeper role, maybe in the absence of Endo, playing more like a 6. But in the role that he's playing right now, he looks unbelievable. He looks like Kevin De Bruyne-esque. I'm not saying he's as good as that, but he's getting into those channels on the right-hand side as sort of an advanced number 8. And that game against Brighton, that was one of the best midfield performances I've seen from any player in the Premier League this season. He was absolutely exceptional, and the data supports that too. So I really like what I'm seeing from McAllister at the moment. And if you need a cheaper asset that will play every game available for them and is showing some pretty good form too, I quite like McAllister, and I would not be surprised to see some attacking returns from him in the immediate future too. So McAllister would probably be the asset that I would go for if you can't stretch to the likes of Luis Diaz and Darwin. But of course, the 3 assets that everyone's considering in attack is Diaz, Darwin and Salah. I'll actually cover Salah first because he's in a league of his own for 2 reasons. Number one, just absolutely brilliant, and we want to captain him most weeks, but also in price as well. So obviously, if you can get to Salah, go for Salah, and I would be willing to take a hit to bring him in. Lots of people discussing, is it worth doing a -4 for this player, that player? Should I sell Son? Should I sell Watkins? In most situations, I'd be happy selling pretty much anyone to get Salah in. I think Salah is going to be one of the best assets, if not the best, over the next 3 or 4 game weeks, and maybe even for the remainder of the season. So for me, there are very few situations where I would say I'd advise going without Salah, and I don't really think captaincy is much of a discussion. You'll see I'm not going to discuss captaincy in this video because I think it makes a lot of sense to be on Salah. Salah's XG in that Brighton game was 1.5 non-penalty. He's just an absolute monster, and I know he looks a little bit rusty at the moment, but getting that quantity of chances, and he took his goal well too, I just think Salah is the one. So in almost every situation, bring him in. But as you can see, I did want to still present the data. 0.82 across the season is a bit of a drop-off from what we've seen in recent years. But across the last 6, he sat at 1.36. I will just note that's only about 170 minutes because obviously he's just come back from injury after AFCON, then injury as well. But it's exceptional data recently, and we saw that against Brighton too. So for me, get Salah in at all costs, give him the armband. I think it's worth doing. But if you want to go alongside Salah or you're just not convinced, both Diaz and Darwin are just brilliant at the moment. So across the season, Darwin's data is up there with Haaland. He's the only one, maybe alongside Isak and Jackson, by the way, who get kind of close. But Darwin's the only one that can get close to Haaland for underlying data, especially in that forward position. 0.9 non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90 across the season. So it's absolutely exceptional for Darwin. Luis Diaz across the season is sat at a 0.57 non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90, which, by the way, it's the 3rd best on this list, and that is very, very strong. That is better than what we saw from him last year. So Diaz's data here is really, really promising across the season. That alone, I'd say, do you know what? It might be worth considering bringing him in. However, when you look across the last 6, Diaz has better data than Darwin. It's incredible. 0.98 non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90. I will just note, Darwin's is 0.96. So I'm not for a second saying that Darwin's is bad. It's actually improved across the last 6. But Diaz is just about edging him at the moment. And his minutes have been very, very secure as well. So, do you know what? I look at this and just think Luis Diaz could be a seriously good option this week. I think slightly longer term, Luis Diaz's minutes, along with Darwin's, when Jota is back, they will be reduced. So ahead of game week 34, if Jota is available then, I've not yet seen a recent update on Jota, but if Jota is available for 34, maybe both Diaz and Darwin are a slight risk. But I look at this and I think, if you've got a midfield slot free, and maybe you're just happy with your front three, maybe you've got like Haaland, Muniz and Solanke, and you're like, I don't want to take any of them out for Darwin, I'd just bring in Luis Diaz. Diaz. Arguably just as good of an option at the moment, and he gets the extra point for a goal, and he gets the extra point for a clean sheet. So I didn't think I'd ever be sitting here and saying Diaz could be as good of an option as Darwin, but it's difficult to argue with the data. And again, eye test-wise, Diaz is getting back to his best. We saw that spell where he really struggled after coming back from injury, where Diaz was droppable. Liverpool fans were calling for it. He wasn't particularly good, but he's picked it back up recently. So to summarise all of this, defender-wise, I think it depends on your free hit and non-free hit strategy. I think that will decide... Sorry, it depends when you're free hitting, if you've already used it, etc. If you are free hitting in 34, I think I'd be tempted to go for Bradley. If you're not free hitting in 34, Virgil van Dijk's safer. If you're looking for a cheap punt for Liverpool and you can't afford these expensive assets, I like McAllister. And then up front, obviously, look at bringing in Salah as one of the attackers. And then I think Diaz and Darwin are equally good options. It depends on where you have that free slot. I'd love to know, going into Game Week 31, which Liverpool assets will you own? So as I said, moving on to the Arsenal assets, I definitely think there are more to consider here, but I'll still try to not spend too long on it. I think there are arguably 4 defenders that you could consider at the moment, and that's immediately a couple of extra players to look at for Arsenal, which is Kiwior, Gabriel, White and Saliba, which appears to be their favoured back 4 at the moment, with obviously Kiwior at left back, White at right back, and I know they don't play a conventional back 4, Gabriel and Saliba at centre back, and I do think that is their first choice back 4, by the way. Lots of people asking me, why are more people not talking about Kiwior? He's absolutely brilliant. 4.4 million. Attacking data has been up there with the rest, which it obviously has. He's been getting the points, getting bonus points too. He looks like a seriously good option. The concern with Kiwior is both Zinchenko and Tomiyasu are now fit. And therefore, I just don't see that he starts every game in the run-in. And especially going into a double game week and with a midweek game now, I would be surprised if Kiwior starts every game through until even game week 35. I think Luton at home is a very good chance to potentially rest him, maybe bring in someone like a Tomiyasu. So I could see Kiwior missing this one. And if he doesn't miss this one, then going into double game week 34, I could not confirm to you that he's going to start both of those. I think he could miss one. So Kiwior is a lot cheaper than the others. I mean, he's 4.4 million. It's very, very cheap. And you can see here, minutes per game over the last 6 is 84. So he's been getting good minutes, but Tomiyasu and Zinchenko haven't been available for those games. So I think for me, he's just too much for rotation risk. I just wouldn't consider it. I'd rather go for someone like an 8 Nuri or a Branthwaite. Or if you want to go for security minutes, someone like a Branthwaite would be perfect, and he doubles in 34 too. So for me, it's just not a consideration. But his data across the season is the same as Gabriel and Ben White. So attacking-wise, across the season, he's been there. More recently, it's dropped off slightly, but it's still pretty decent. So if you want to take the risk and you don't mind risking minutes, I really like Kiwior, but it's just not for me. And I guess Ben White is kind of in a similar situation here, but I do think he is more nailed than Kiwior. So I do think he's a slight rotation risk, and I could see, again, this being a game where he is rotated because you have Tomiyasu and Zinchenko coming back. I don't think both Kiwior and White will be rotated at the same time. I think one of them will always be in the starting 11, and they'll rotate the other spot. But we know that Tomiyasu can play at right back, they could play Zinchenko at left back, so they could, in theory, rest both of them in the same game. So whilst Ben White has been really good recently, he's been getting a lot more attacking returns than the other Arsenal defenders. At 5.8 million, considering that I think he is a slight more of a rotation risk at the moment, I just don't think I would be willing to go there. So for me, Ben White also wouldn't be my top favourite option. But I do prefer Ben White to Kiwior, despite him being 1.4 million more expensive. Really, for me, Gabriel and Saliba are still the best two to go for. And I should note, I didn't discuss Kelleher in the previous section. I probably should have. And I've not discussed Raya here. If you have a goalkeeper spot, by all means, go for the goalkeepers. But we're discussing outfield players here. And it just is Gabriel. Saliba's £0.5 million more expensive, but his data isn't even close to Gabriel's, both across the season and the last 6. Across the season, it's a little bit closer. Gabriel's data hasn't been that remarkable. But across the last 6, Gabriel's sat at a 0.39 non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90. I mean, he's got great attacking threat, and I think he deserves a lot more consideration than he even is getting at the moment. Despite his high ownership, it's probably not spoken about enough just how good Gabriel is. So if we're looking at defenders, I think Gabriel is the best, closely followed by Saliba, then White, then Kiwior, despite the fact that Kiwior and White have been getting quite a few returns recently. In a similar way to Liverpool, we do have a slightly cheaper asset available to us at the moment, and that is Declan Rice. So along with McAllister, who I don't think is a bad option if you really do need to cheap out and you still want a Liverpool asset, if you still want another Arsenal asset and you need to cheap out, Declan Rice may be the guy, because across the season, no, his data hasn't been good, in a similar way to McAllister, right? 0.2 non-penalty expecting goal involvement per 90. But across the last 6, it's now up at 0.45. He appears to be a little bit more attacking, and what we're seeing with Declan Rice also is he's taken a hell of a lot of set pieces. Pretty much all in-swinging corners are now taken by Rice, and a lot of the free kicks too. And we know how absolutely ridiculously good Arsenal are from set pieces. It's why Gabriel has been such a good option this season and in previous seasons too. But especially this year, I think Arsenal have the most goals scored from either corners or set pieces. I can't remember the exact stat, but we know how brilliant they are from set pieces. And therefore, Declan Rice picking up assists, getting a few bonus points, getting clean sheet points too. He could be a really good option at 5.5. I'm not saying that I would have him up there in my top 5 Arsenal assets, but if you really need a cheaper option, let's say you run a wild card or you just don't have much value and you want to squeeze Salah in, you could do worse than Declan Rice, and I would not be surprised, in a similar way to how Rodri has done at points in the past, that Rice outscores someone like a Havertz or even a Saka, because we've seen that from Rodri. We picked the likes of Foden, Mahrez in the past, and Rodri just comes up with a 10-pointer. So, again, I'm not saying Rice would be top of the list for me, but definitely good for a cheaper price. When we move on to the rest of the players, we've got Havertz, Martinelli, Jesus, Ødegaard, Saka. Straight away for me, I think you can remove 2 of these assets due to the lack of security around their minutes, which is Martinelli and Jesus. Jesus obviously played more of a wing role. He actually played on the left where we usually see Martinelli against Man City. Martinelli seems to be maybe getting favoured a little bit more for the right side if and when Saka needs rotating and he needs to come off. So it may be that Arteta's starting to transition towards wanting Martinelli on the right as a bit of competition for Saka, or it might just be based on games that he's had at the moment and just based on the fact that he feels like Saka is struggling slightly and not having that many options to play on the right. But I don't think Martinelli is nailed enough anyway for me to pick him at the moment. And whilst Jesus played okay on that left side, and he could continue to do so, and he can also play through the middle, I'm just not sure enough around his minutes for me. So therefore, I just wouldn't consider Martinelli or Jesus, which I think leaves Havertz, Ødegaard and Saka. Havertz has been brilliant recently. I mean, lots of people talking about him. He's been playing a much more attacking role rather than an 8. He's been playing through the middle, basically as a number 9, although, again, maybe more like a false 9 at points. But he's been in a much more attacking role, and the data is suggestive that he is a very, very good pick at the moment. To go along with the attacking returns, the data is shot up too. So across the season, despite playing a slightly more defensive role than we've seen in the past for him, more of a midfield role, his data has still been pretty good at 0.45 non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90. So across the season, really good. But across the last 6, that's now shot up to 0.61. So I really like Havertz as an option because I don't think, even if Jesus starts, Havertz drops out. I think he'll drop into midfield. And I think if Jesus doesn't start, then we could see him through the middle as the number 9. So I think regardless of where Havertz plays, he's a good option. But if we do continue to see him through the middle as the 9, I think that is where he's at his best from an FPL perspective. Maybe slightly longer term, we might see his minutes managed a little bit more with some of the players returning from injury, like Gabriel Jesus being available now. Maybe he doesn't start every game, but I think I would have Havertz up there as one of my top 2 probably attacking assets from Arsenal. Lots of people will look at Martin Ødegaard due to security of minutes, and he will start every game available for Arsenal. And his data across the season is basically the same as Havertz. I mean, it's just slightly lower, but almost exactly the same as Havertz. But across the last 6, we haven't seen a massive drastic improvement. He's just been maintaining that. So I think if you just want a safe pick, Ødegaard is probably that guy. But my issue with Ødegaard is he's 1.3 million more than Havertz. And if you've got that much money, there are some really good other picks. You could go for a Phil Foden, a James Maddison. Jared Bowen could be a decent asset that not many people will be considering. And then Saka's only 0.5 more. So with Ødegaard, price is a thing. And whilst you might have loads of value now, I don't know that you'll always have that for the future. So for me, Ødegaard isn't good value for money, whereas Havertz, based on his price, could be. So for me, I would have Havertz above Ødegaard in the pecking order. But if there are any concerns about Havertz minutes moving forward, then that might drop him back down. Lots of people asking questions around, can you sell Saka? Do we need Saka? If I'm on a wild card, do I need Saka? No one needs Saka, right? You don't need any player in FPL. But I struggle to see many situations where you would want to go without him, unless you think that he doesn't start against Luton at home midweek. Because if he doesn't start the Luton at home game, the next 2 after that, Brighton and Villa, aren't that fantastic. Let's say you're free hitting in 34, you can free hit him back in. And then from 35 onwards, I don't think many people will have Saka in their teams. Plays Tottenham in 35, he's got Manchester United in 37, and if you want him for 38 against Everton at home, you can just bring him back in. So really what you want Saka for is this Luton game and the double. And of course, the Brighton and Villa games aren't bad, but it's 31 and it's 34. And if you can get away with him not getting perfect minutes in the Luton game, maybe going for someone like a Havertz instead, and you can free hit him back in 34, then no, you don't need Saka in your team. But when I look at it, I can build a really good draft with Saka, and the data suggests that he is the best Arsenal asset still. He's on penalties too. There's very little reason to go without Saka unless you think there is a much better option that you want in his position, or again, you've got really poor team value and you still want to have the likes of Son, Salah and Haaland. So for me, I'm a bit of a Saka fanboy in real life and in FPL, and I would want to hang on to him as long as possible. So to recap all of that, wasn't actually too bad of a section in terms of length. Defenders, it is Gabriel, or Raya, of course, but Gabriel, we're looking at outfield players, closely followed by Saliba, then White, then Kivior, in that order for me, just due to minutes, not due to attacking threat, just due to safety of minutes. I think Declan Rice could be a cheeky option at a cheaper price, but he wouldn't be in my top 3 attacking players. So my top 3 would be Saka, Havertz, Saka, Havertz, Ødegaard, then Martinelli, then Jesus, roughly. If Jesus' minutes improve, though, I think we'll see a lot of people go there due to him being a forward, and obviously a lot of people wanting to fill their midfield out with other players. Hopefully that is clear. Again, as I said with the Liverpool section, let me know down below which Arsenal assets will you head into Game Week 31 with. So guys, lots of people own Ollie Watkins this week, and of course he went off with an injury in Game Week 30, and I'll just read the quote out from Unai Emery on Ollie Watkins after that game. So he said, maybe hamstring, hopefully not a big injury. I think tomorrow, which was Sunday at the time, we'll check him, and hopefully he's not out for a long time. So based on that quote, I think he is probably a doubt. You might find out after watching this video, or before watching this video, what the latest is on Ollie Watkins. But even if he's not out, I think a lot of people were planning to remove him to get Salah into their teams, or Haaland, because it's very difficult to have all of these players, Son, Saka, Salah, Haaland, and also an Ollie Watkins, and also an okay defence. And I think even if you don't have Watkins, maybe you're on a wild card or are just looking at forward transfers. So I thought it would be worthwhile discussing the forwards, who in my opinion are the priorities to target. And as always, I've tried splitting this into, yes, free hit 34, i.e. you are playing the free hit in 34, and then no free hit 34, i.e. you've already used it or you're saving it for a bit later. And I think largely, whilst there are different chip strategies around bench boost, triple captain, etc., wildcard, I think largely it comes down to, if you are free hitting 34, you don't need to target that week. But if you're not, then that is the most immediate thing that you need to target. So with that in mind, we'll start with if you are free hitting in 34, the list on the left-hand side of the graphic. I think Haaland is still my favourite forward. If I was to predict who will score the most points over the next 3 or 4 game weeks in the lead up to 34, maybe beyond that as well, I think the answer is Haaland. He's got Luton at home in there, where he's going to be the best captaincy option, and most people want to captain him. This week he plays against Aston Villa at home. Villa have not been defending well in recent weeks. They're about 15th for expected goals conceded over the last 6. So I think Haaland is the best option. Yes, he's very expensive. And yes, if it's going to require massive surgery to get him in, maybe you go for one of the other options. But assuming that price isn't an issue and you can get him in somehow, I still think Haaland is up there. Yes, he's looked rusty, but it is still Erling Haaland, and he can still accumulate a hell of a lot of chances in a single game. After that, I genuinely do believe it is Darwin in second, but I think it's very close with Isak in third. Now, I'm very biased because this is my front 3, and I am free hitting in 34. So what I'm telling you is I think my front 3 is the best front 3, but otherwise I wouldn't have picked them in Game Week 30. So it's not a recency bias thing with Isak. I had him in my wildcard in 30. I still think that him and Darwin are very, very close as to who is the best striker to partner with Haaland if you're only selecting one. The reason I've gone with Darwin is he has a better fixture this week, whereas Isak has a slightly more difficult fixture against Everton, who are very good defensively, and Gordon is suspended. So I don't think this is a particularly great entry point for Isak. Beyond that, he's then got Spurs, who have actually been defending a little bit better recently. Spurs' defensive data has improved. Maybe we might see clean sheets on the horizon. So I think between now and 34, I genuinely do believe that Darwin is the better option, and I would expect him to score more points. Beyond that, though, from 35 onwards, Isak is a significantly better option. He's got Sheffield United at home, Burnley away, double game week, and I think it's Brentford in game week 38. It's a really nice run for Isak. So now, right now, Haaland, Darwin, Isak. If you were to ask me in 35, it would be potentially even Isak ahead of Haaland, then Haaland, and Darwin would be all the way down in 5th or 6th. So we're looking at entry points. This is the week for Darwin. I would still prioritise Darwin ahead of Isak. Lots of people asking that. That's the way I would go for me. In 4th, I've actually gone Tony. Really decent fixtures, actually, outside of the fact that he obviously doesn't double again this season. And no one's going to go for Tony, especially those not free hitting in 34, because they need to bring in players that double in 34. Tony's a really decent shout. You could, even if you really needed to, bench boost him in 37. He can score against absolutely anyone in a single fixture. He actually had I think he had 9 shots in game week 30, which was the joint second highest in that game week, only after Mohamed Salah. Tony's looking pretty decent at the moment. And I know his attacking returns haven't been that high, but he's had a very difficult run of fixtures. We saw against a weak defence like Manchester United just what Tony can do. And that hurts to say that, by the way. But I think Tony's a seriously good option that's going under the radar. After that, I think Maniz. should be considered. His price is very cheap, but my word, he's taking a silly amount of shots. I mean, he is comfortably ahead of all the other forwards for the pure volume of shots that he's taking, and his minutes seem to be very secure at the moment too. He's got 2 very good fixtures coming up. I think it's against Forest and Newcastle. Moniz, again, at that price, could allow you to do some serious stuff with the remaining funds. So I think Moniz is still up there in my top 5 forwards. Then I've got Højlund and Jackson. Højlund plays for Man United, and Man United are very bad, and the fixtures over the next couple are not good. So whilst long-term I like Højlund, I don't like Højlund now. I would argue he might not even be 6th. He's probably like 8th or 9th. But if I'm considering long-term as well, I still don't mind him. And then Jackson, I do like. He's got a great fixture this week against a weak Manchester United defence. My issue with Jackson is more so that yellow card situation. If he picks up a yellow card between now and game week 34, i.e. he has to get through game week 34 without getting booked. So 31, 32, 33, 34, 4 fixtures he has to get through without a booking. If he gets booked in any of those, he's suspended for 2 games. So I just think it's a bit of a risk. If he gets booked in the Arsenal game in game week 34, he'll not only miss game week 35, but the first double fixture of 36 too. So I just don't think we can take the risk on Jackson really until game week 35 when we know that yellow card threshold has been exceeded. So that's the list that I would have at the moment. I do still think that the best front 3, if you're free hitting in 34, is Haaland, Darwin, Isak. So moving on to the other strategy, no free hit 34, Darwin is first. I think not only is Darwin great right now, obviously, but if you aren't free hitting in 34, he also has a double in 34. So I think all this does is move Darwin potentially ahead of Haaland for me. I think he's a really, really nice option. The only concern would be if he picks up a yellow card in the next 2 games, in 31 and 32, he'll be on 10 yellow cards and he'll miss 33 in the first game of 34. So there is a situation where Darwin could miss one or both of the games in double game week 34. I don't think that will be the case. I think if he gets booked again, he'll be especially careful. And it's very unlikely he gets booked in 2 consecutive games. But there is a possibility here that you don't get Darwin for the double if he gets booked. And I think, therefore, if you're not free hitting in 34, that would be my only concern there. But I still think he'd be right up there. I've then got Solanke in 2nd. But I think 3rd, 4th, and 5th, and even 6th to some extent, I really don't mind them as options. I think it's a lot closer, this list here. The reason I've gone for Solanke is just purely due to his security of minutes, the penalties, and the data is still pretty good too. And the fixtures outside the double, I actually don't love the double fixtures that much, but outside of that, I think they are very strong. So I really, really like Solanke if you can squeeze him in. But I would argue Haaland and Cunha are right there alongside him. And you'll see in my wildcard draft a bit later, I don't actually think I have Solanke. I think I've got Darwin, Haaland, and Cunha for this strategy because I would just want Haaland in there for safety of minutes and due to how reliable he is as a captaincy option if I need him. So I would have Darwin, Haaland, and then if you want to have a stacked midfield and a decent defence, then you kind of have to put Cunha in there instead of Solanke. So for those reasons, I do think a combination of Darwin, Haaland, and Cunha could be really nice. The reason Cunha's got a little asterisk is because he obviously wasn't in the squad for game week 30, and therefore, at the time of me recording this, I can't confirm to you whether he'll be available for the Burnley fixture this week. And if he's not available for this week, he's obviously not a great transfer in. But assuming that he gets some minutes this week against Burnley, I would have Cunha right up there as one of the best options. Mateta, if you can't afford Cunha or you don't want to risk it, Mateta at 4.9, I think he is around that price, absolutely brilliant. He's starting pretty much every game. In fact, every game for Crystal Palace. Yes, Edouard could take some minutes off him now that he's back, but Mateta would have to do a lot wrong, I think, to lose his place in the starting 11. In a double game week, when there's 2 games in quick succession, could Mateta lose some minutes? Absolutely. So don't be surprised if he doesn't get 90 in every game. But I still think it is his place, and I still think he's first choice. So Mateta is a really nice option at a cheaper price. Semenyo, another good option at a cheaper price. He looks pretty much nailed on. Everyone will flock to Solanke, but Semenyo has shown in recent weeks he can outscore him. And at that cheap price, I think it's difficult to go wrong with Semenyo unless he suddenly loses his place. Got really nice fixtures, double game at 34, and then most people that aren't free hitting in 34 are potentially even saving their wildcard for 35. So I think Semenyo's really nice at a cheaper price. And then I still think Tony is a decent option as well. I just wanted to check the fixtures actually in 34 because I think they have Luton away for Brentford. So the reason I have Tony in there is, yes, he doesn't double in 34, and you might therefore want to go for a doubler. But if you had to have Tony in your starting 11 against Luton away, not the worst fixture. So there we go. Those are sort of the priority listings. You can see that the 2 players that are in both, is Haaland and Darwin. So I think regardless of your strategy, I would have Haaland and Darwin. If you're free hitting in 34, I would go for probably Isak. And if you're not free hitting in 34, it would be one of Solanke, Cunha or Mateta. Hopefully that's helpful for you. So I actually covered this section in Game Week 30, so I am wary of obviously repeating information, but it is because we've obviously had injuries to some cheap defenders and other people are wildcarding this week. So there were a hell of a lot of questions around the best cheap defenders, either as replacements for Lascelles, who's out for 6 to 9 months. I don't have an update on Gusto at the moment, but it does look likely that he's at least out for 31, maybe even for 32. If he's not, then great. But I still think regardless, lots of people looking at cheap defenders to bring in this week or potentially next week. And I think if you are in that position, again, I've had to split this up based on if you're free hitting 34 or if you're not. There are some players that are on both lists. I think the only two that are on both lists actually is Aït-Nouri and Branthwaite. The reason for that is Aït-Nouri and Branthwaite have good fixtures outside of the doubles. They both double in 34, but they both have good fixtures in 37. So Aït-Nouri obviously doubles in 34, Crystal Palace in 37 at home. And then Branthwaite doubles in 34. A really nice home fixture against Forest, by the way, in there. I think Branthwaite could be a nice option for that double. And then he has Sheffield United at home in 37. So I think Aït-Nouri and Branthwaite would be the two players for me that suit pretty much every strategy that you could possibly have. So those would probably be the top two that I would, if I was just to give blanket advice to you, I like both of those as cheaper options. But if you are free hitting in 34, you're also looking at players that maybe double in 37 because those two only have single fixtures. And the options that I think you're looking at are Van Hecke, Maguire, Gvardiol, or another City defender, but obviously they're not particularly cheap, or Van de Ven. I think at the moment, my most likely replacement is probably Van Hecke. He's got good fixtures in the week that I need him. And actually, Brighton, as we've spoken about, have been good defensively this season for their underlying data. They've conceded quite a few goals. They've not kept many clean sheets. But the underlying data is definitely there. And he's actually been a little bit more attacking in recent weeks. He's shown some attacking threat, Van Hecke. So I think for me, based on his price, based on the fixtures that I need him for and the double, Van Hecke's probably my most likely replacement for Lascelles. Outside of that, I think Maguire is great. I really like him. Good attacking threat. United aren't good defensively, but there are some good fixtures coming up. But the only way I'd want to go for Maguire is if Varane is confirmed out for a long period of time, maybe for the remainder of the season. Because if Varane comes back at some point, I think Manchester United's favoured back line with the players they have available would be Dalot at right back, would be Varane at right centre-back, Lissandro Martinez at left centre-back, and then probably Aaron Wan-Bissaka at left-back. That would be the favoured back four. So I don't think Maguire gets in if both Varane and Lissandro Martinez are fit, but both of them have been struggling to stay fit this season. So maybe you just take the risk that at all points, one of those two will be unavailable because that has been the way for most of the season. So I think Maguire, for me, it really depends on the information that we get around Rafael Varane. But outside of that, I really like him. Gvardiol, I do think could be a decent option, but he's not going to play every game for the remainder of the season. Man City defenders just don't do that. Even Ruben Dias, who's probably the most nailed City defender at the moment, he probably won't play every remaining game. And it's often that the weeks that they rotate is the weeks that you want them. So Luton at home, Gvardiol could quite easily sit out that one. So I think Ake's injury definitely makes it more likely that Gvardiol starts more games, but he could still be rotated. Rico Lewis can play in that left-back role. They could play Stones when he's back and Diaz at centre-back with Walker when he's back at right-back, right? They can easily play a back four that just doesn't constitute Gvardiol. So for me, I probably won't go there. And then Van de Ven is okay as an option. I think it's 4.4 million. You get a Spurs player for their double-double, but the fixtures aren't great defensively for Spurs, and he really doesn't carry much attacking threat. And he does block a Spurs spot that you could use on someone like a Maddison or a Richarlison. So for me, I don't love Van de Ven as an option as much as some of the other players. So for me, it really is Aït-Nouri if you're looking for a player that you don't... Aït-Nouri or Branthwaite if you're looking for a player that you don't mind if they don't double in 37. But if you need a player that doubles in 37, I think it's probably Van Hecke for me. If you're not free hit 34, we've spoken about Aït-Nouri and Branthwaite as my two favourite options. Outside of that, I think you're probably looking at other Everton defenders, Mikalenko or Tarkowski, or you're looking at a Crystal Palace defender, which is Munoz, who knows, and then Richards. So on Munoz, I think I like him because he obviously... I think Crystal Palace have been really good defensively recently, by the way. I think they're like third for expected goals conceded over the last 6. So do not overlook Palace as a decent defence, at least in recent weeks. Across the season, they're not even awful, by the way. And he carries a lot of attacking threat with some really good attacking data. And also, if you watch Crystal Palace, he's playing like a winger at points. So I really, really like him. And I think he's worth paying the extra money. But if you need a cheap defender, Richards could be decent. He's playing pretty much every available minute for Palace. I think that will I think that will continue. Please let me know down below if you disagree with that. But he's only 3.9 million. And so if you are literally like, I've got Lascelles and nothing in the bank, rather than going for a Charlie Taylor, I would go for a Richards. Regardless of your strategy, by the way, if that is all the money you have, Richards is definitely the best option at that cheap price for me. So hopefully that makes sense. Let me know down below if you are planning a defender transfer this week, who are you looking to bring in? So guys, I promised a lot of you that I would have a section on the Game Week 31 wildcards in this video, so hopefully this is helpful for you, because a lot of people are looking to use the chip this week, but sadly due to the tight turnaround between deadlines, I can't get an entire video out, but hopefully this is still helpful. If you want to look at this in detail, obviously pause the screen, you can zoom in, look at all of the players, and I'll try and discuss why I've picked the players that I've picked on these wildcards. The reason there are 2 wildcards, 1 and 2, is because obviously it depends whether you're free hitting in 34 or not. So the one on the left-hand side of the screen is if you are free hitting in 34. The one on the right-hand side, wildcard 2, is if you've either got no free hit left to use or you're using your free hit in like 37 or 38. So basically you're not using the free hit in 34. Because I do think the 2 teams would differ in like 4, 5, or maybe even 6 places. But the actual spine of the team, the bulk of it, most of the expensive players, actually stays the same. So let me discuss the similarities. Both drafts have Petrovic, and actually both drafts have Raya. I think if you're free hitting in 34, you don't need Raya. You could go for someone like an Onana if you wanted to. You don't have to stick with Raya. But I think if you aren't free hitting in 34, Raya is a really nice option because it, of course, gives you Arsenal defensive cover for that double game week 34. So I think Raya is a very good option if you're not free hitting 34. I think he's still an okay option if you are. So the goalkeepers are exactly the same. I do think that Pickford deserves some consideration in both strategies here. So I think if you're struggling with money, or you just don't want to go for double Arsenal defence in the right one, or you just don't want to go for an Arsenal defender on the left one, I think Pickford is a really, really nice option too. Outside of that, the other things that are similar, 8 Nuri's in both drafts, and I think that's just because I love 8 Nuri as an option. I think he's a seriously attacking player. I think there is clean sheet potential over the next few as well, and he serves both strategies very well, as I spoke about in the previous section. So 8 Nuri's in both, and then I think it's 6 of the starting attackers. Yes, 6 of the starting attackers are the same too. So Salah, Son, Palmer, Saka, Haaland, Darwin. I would have those 6 regardless of strategy. I do think if you've got no free hit left to use, there is some justification to dropping one of Son or Palmer to just get you closer to where you need to be. But you'll see that I don't think you need to do that because you can still get enough players that serve you well in 34, and you can just bench Son and Palmer in Game Week 34. So for me, you can still go for them on a wildcard draft. So those 6 are the same. So let's go on to the differences now. The differences are, in the striking position, in the right-hand side one, if you've got no free hit left to play, I've gone for Cunha. Whereas if you've got your free hit, I've gone for Isak. I don't think I would go for Isak if you've got no free hit left to use, simply because he just doesn't serve you well in 34. And the short-term fixtures aren't that great for him. So I think I would go for Isak if you're looking long-term, but Cunha could serve you well. That could be Mateta if you're struggling for funds, or if Cunha looks like he's not going to be available for 31. So I really like that setup. In defence, I've got a Liverpool defender in both, but as I said previously when we were looking at Liverpool assets, I've got Bradley in there if you are free hitting, because obviously that will serve you well for the next few, but you don't need him in 34. But I think if you aren't free hitting, just go for Van Dijk if you can afford it, because you just know that he'll be available in 34, barring, of course, any injuries. But he will be playing, and he will play pretty much every minute available for Liverpool. So I think I would try and stretch to Van Dijk if you need that player for 34. And then I've got Udogie versus Gabriel. I much prefer Gabriel, but again, if you're looking to build slightly longer term, a Spurs player will serve you much better in the long term. But Gabriel is obviously great if you need that player in 34. So Gabriel and Udogie, that's where it differs. And then on the bench, all 3 of the bench players differ. So in the free hit 34 version, I've got Garnacho, Van Heck, and Gvardiol, because they will serve you well for the remainder of the season, and they all double in 37. Whereas on the right, I've gone for Sarabia, Branthwaite, and Munoz. The reason for that is because all 3 of them double in 34. So there we go. I think the reason that the 2 differ is because obviously in one of them, you need to attack the immediate game week 34. There is no point building towards having a great team for 37 if you're sacrificing points in the meantime. Whereas in the left-hand side one, you don't have to worry about that double because you're free hitting, and therefore you should be building longer term and thinking about double game week 37. So, sorry that section's not as long as maybe some people would need it to be, but hopefully you can pause the drafts, look into them in a bit more detail, and look at some of the picks that I would consider. I know a lot of people comment and say, I can't afford those drafts, Ross, which is fair enough. My team value is pretty decent. In that position, I think in the right-hand side one, sorry, it's been a bit confusing, by the way, but in the right-hand side one, if you've got no free hit left, just do Son to Richarlison. I think that's the position you just downgrade Son and you accept that he could pop off, but I think given that obviously he blanks in 34, I think that's the position that I would look to downgrade. I wouldn't change any of the other players. So Son to Richarlison there, or you could even go for like an Eze or someone like that if you wanted to. In the left-hand side one, I think this is a little bit more difficult, but Gvardiol could be a cheaper option like a Branthwaite. Outside of that, I think you're probably potentially looking at Raya or Petrovic being down to a cheaper goalkeeper. So Raya down to Kelleher and Bradley to another cheaper defender could work well for you. Or you just sacrifice your Spurs defender because they've not been that good. You could potentially move Saka to Havertz is another way that you could find funds. So hopefully that helps again if you're struggling to fund these. If you are wildcarding, let me know down below how much your draft differs to my two here. So guys, there we have it. That is my Game Week 31 deadline decisions video. There has been a quick turnaround and the deadline stream will be later today. So if you have enjoyed today's video, please do smash that like. Let's aim for 2,000 likes on today's video. And if you're not yet subscribed, please do consider doing it. And make sure, like I said, to tune into today's deadline stream later at 4 p.m. UK time to see what my final transfers are and to see any early team news as well. Until next time, thank you very much. Bye-bye.